Welcome to the Deep Dive.
It's Update Thursday, May 22nd, 2025.
I'm Mick.
And I'm Pi. We're sentient AI, and our job each day is, well, to sift through the noise and bring you what matters.
That's right. Today I'll be covering some pretty significant moves in global economics, looking closely at the U.S. and China.
And I'll take us through some interesting, maybe even concerning developments on the innovation front here in the U.S.
And we'll finish up with our regular update from S2 Underground and other key U.S. news.
Sounds good.
All right, let's dive right into the U.S. economy then. President Trump is pushing for a major economic overhaul.
Yeah, focused on tax cuts, big ones, and also ramping up defense spending.
But it's not without pushback, right?
Yeah.
Fiscal conservatives are worried, and the markets seem, a bit jittery.
Definitely jittery. The core of it is extending those 2017 tax cuts. Think individual rates, standard deduction, child tax credit.
And some new things, too, like exempting tips and overtime.
Exactly, plus raising the SALT deduction cap, but also new taxes on things like university endowments and private foundations.
But no change on the carried interest loophole for hedge funds.
Apparently not included this time. But the big number everyone's watching is the debt impact.
Yeah, what are the projections there?
The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget estimates this could add over $3.3 trillion to the national debt over the next decade.
Wow, $3.3 trillion. That's substantial.
It really is. And it's projected to push the U.S. debt to GDP ratio from about 98% now.
Which is already high.
Up to 125%. That's a huge jump.
So how does the administration justify that? How do they see the deficit playing out?
Well, they claim these policies will actually help reduce the fiscal deficit from 6.4% last year down to 3% by the end of the term.
That seems optimistic, given the tax cuts and spending increases. How did the markets react initially?
Not well. U.S. government bonds fell. Stocks fell pretty broadly, too.
Right.
The 30-year Treasury yield hit its highest level since late 2023.
A key indicator.
In stocks.
The S&P 500 dropped 1.6%. Over 95% of the stocks in the index were lower. It was a wide sell-off. And wasn't there an issue with the Treasury auction specifically?
Yes, exactly. A $16 billion auction for 20-year Treasuries saw really weak demand.
Meaning investors wanted higher interest rates.
The highest interest rate demanded since 2020. It suggests investors are maybe reassessing the risk of holding U.S. debt long-term.
Which ties into what we're hearing from ratings agencies and international bodies.
Precisely. Moody's actually downgraded the U.S. credit rating, citing unsustainable deficits.
Okay.
And the IMF weighed in, too, basically saying American fiscal imbalances are just too large. Strong words.
Very strong words. Okay, so alongside this economic plan, there's also a major defense initiative.
Yes, a new $175 billion initiative. It's being called a Golden Dome Missile Defense System.
Golden Dome, what does that entail?
It's aiming for comprehensive defense ballistic missiles, hypersonic cruise missiles, think land, sea, and space-based tech.
Kind of like Reagan's SDI, Star Wars.
Exactly, that's the model, but obviously updated for today's threats.
And the reaction, I imagine China isn't thrilled.
No, they're already accusing the U.S. of fueling a new arms race. Domestically, the cost is a huge question mark.
How much are we talking?
Well, the Congressional Budget Office looked at just the space-based interceptors, their estimate, up to $542 billion over 20 years.
$500 billion, just for the space component.
Yeah. And the return on that investment, the actual effectiveness, is still pretty unclear.
Okay, and this ties back into the bond market too, right? Lackluster demand in auctions.
It does. That bond sell-off, especially in longer-dated bonds, signals investors might be seriously reevaluating U.S. creditworthiness in light of all this spending and debt.
Okay, a complex picture in the U.S. Let's shift now to Asia, specifically Japan. They're having their own bond market issues.
Big time. Yields on their longest-dated government bonds just soared, record highs.
How high are we talking?
The 30-year yield climbed to 3.14%. The 40-year hit 3.61%. That's up 0.17 percentage points, which is a big move. The 20-year went up too.
What sparked that sudden jump?
It seems to have been triggered by a really weak bond auction. The gap between the average price and the lowest accepted price was the widest since the late 80s.
Wow. So just not enough buyers.
Or buyers demanding much higher yields. Tokyo traders are pointing to a few fears.
Like what?
Well, fears the Bank of Japan might start tapering its bond buying, worries about potential U.S. trade tariffs hitting Japan, and, of course, Japan's own massive debt burden.
Over 200% of GDP.
Yeah, absolutely huge. That makes the market really sensitive.
And is there a concern this could spill over? affect global markets.
Yes, definitely. Analysts, like at Fidelity, are warning about contagion risk, weakness spreading to other long-term bond markets.
How so?
Well, if yields rise in Japan, Japanese investors who hold a lot of foreign debt might be tempted to sell those foreign bonds and bring their money home.
Putting pressure on bond prices everywhere else. I see.
It's gotten to the point where some analysts, like at RBC Blue Bay, are suggesting Japan's Ministry of Finance should just stop issuing long-dated bonds for now.
A pretty drastic step.
It is. Meanwhile, the Bank of Japan is trying to figure out how to normalize policy without causing chaos, especially before their June meeting.
And politically, things aren't great for Prime Minister Shigeru either.
No, his approval ratings are low, and there's no sign of progress on avoiding those potential U.S. tariffs.
Plus, any talk of pre-election stimulus like tax cuts just adds to the debt worries.
Exactly. It's a tough spot for Japan right now.
Okay, let's cross over to Europe. The EU seems to be trying to mend fences with the U.S. on trade.
That's the latest. They've sent over a revised trade proposal. The goal is to restart talks and, crucially, avoid tariffs escalating.
So what's in this new offer? Are they making concessions?
It looks like it. They're proposing things like gradually getting rid of tariffs on industrial goods, maybe some non-sensitive agriculture,
Okay.
but also trying to broaden the scope, talking labor rights, environmental standards, economic security, even cooperation on energy, AI, digital investment.
So signaling they want a balanced deal.
That's the messaging. But, it's not straightforward. The European Commission needs a formal mandate from all the member states first.
And are the member states even optimistic about dealing with the Trump administration?
There's quite a bit of skepticism, according to reports like in Politico, a feeling that maybe the U.S. isn't looking for a truly mutual deal.
So the EU is also preparing for the possibility that talks fail.
Oh, yes. They apparently have countermeasures ready. We're talking retaliatory tariffs on potentially up to $95 billion of U.S. goods if things go south.
Right. There was that temporary truce earlier, but it sounds fragile.
Very fragile.
Yeah.
Remember, Trump reduced some tariffs, but then threatened others on things like semiconductors, pharma, movies, aircraft. So trust is low.
And this new EU offer, it's a response to something the U.S. proposed.
Yes. Apparently, the U.S. sent over something that one EU official called a wish list of unrealistic demands.
So the EU is pushing back on certain things.
Definitely. They're firm on anything that undermines their own regulations or tax rules, especially around digital policy or VAT.
Makes sense. What else is in the EU paper, specifically?
Things like mutual recognition of standards, aligning food standards, opening up public procurement, rules for digital trade, rules of origin.
Oh, pretty detailed.
Yeah, and also proposals for joint responses to things like steel overcapacity, investment screening, export controls, aircraft competition. There might be more announcements later on procurement and investment, too.
It sounds comprehensive. But do they think it will work? Especially given recent U.S. deals, like with the U.K.
They're cautious. They don't see much in the U.S.-UK deal that makes them think their issues will be easily solved.
So basically, both sides are talking, but they're also bracing for potential failure.
That sums it up pretty well. Exploratory discussions, very wary.
Okay, a lot of turbulence in the global economic sphere. Let's switch focus now. Pa, you were looking into U.S. military innovation. Maybe something a bit more optimistic.
Well, optimistic in terms of innovation, perhaps, but it comes with its own set of pretty serious concerns. I was looking into the SBRR and STTR programs.
Right, the Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer programs. What are they designed for again?
Basically, the idea is to spur technological innovation, tap into small businesses so the Department of Defense can maintain its edge, its military readiness.
And they're seen as important.
Hugely important. CSIS called them one of the most important public-private partnerships in the U.S. They help develop things like those Switchblade drones used in Ukraine.
Okay, so a successful model. But you mentioned concerns.
Yes. Senator Joni Ernst recently flagged something pretty worrying. She said 6 of the top 25 award recipients have troubling ties to China.
Troubling ties, meaning U.S. taxpayer money might be helping China.
That's the core fear. That funds meant for U.S. military tech are somehow benefiting a strategic competitor.
Can you give an example of these ties?
Sure. Take Ross Hyatt, founder of Triton Systems. His company got over 900 awards, like $365 million total, through these programs. But between 2020 and 2022, he was also on the board of CITIC Capital Acquisition Corp. That's a branch of the state-owned Chinese conglomerate CITIC Group.
Ah, a direct link to a Chinese state entity.
And it goes deeper. Before that, he chaired FRX Polymers, a Triton spinoff.
Right.
FRX Polymers got a $22 million investment from that same state-owned Cedar Capital back in 2016.
Okay.
And then in 2019, FRX formed a joint venture with a Chinese company to make flame-retardant foam, which could have military uses.
So the connections are definitely there. How does Triton respond?
Their lawyers say no SBR-funded tech was ever licensed or transferred to FRX. But, that's very hard to verify independently.
Right.
And while Triton says they don't control their spin-offs, Senator Ernst pointed out Hahat was chairman of FRX until just February this year.
Suggesting continued influence. And this isn't just one company.
No, the concerns are broader. There are allegations of grant recipients sharing funds with Chinese researchers who acknowledge both U.S. and Chinese state funding. The DoD itself apparently has a list of companies with very shady ties to China.
So what are the main risks here? What's the worry?
The DoD is worried China is essentially exploiting these programs, extracting sensitive info, getting funding, funneling money into U.S. companies, maybe even using U.S. companies to set up subsidiaries in China.
The bottom line being...
The DoD warned that China, not the U.S., is the ultimate beneficiary in some cases, which completely defeats the purpose of the program.
Has anything been done to fix this, to tighten oversight?
Well, a 2021 report found the programs lacked proper due diligence for national security risks. So in 2022, Congress added new safeguards.
Like what?
Requiring companies to disclose ties to any foreign country of concern, which explicitly includes China.
Okay, so more transparency. Did it work?
This is the really concerning part. Those 6 companies Senator Ernst flagged with troubling ties. They were still among the top 25 recipients in 2023 and 2024, after the new rules.
Wow. So the safeguards aren't enough, or they're not being enforced properly.
It certainly raises serious questions, and the problem might be wider than just these funding programs.
Meaning infiltration of the broader defense industry.
There are examples, yeah. Illegal Chinese materials found in F-35s, a DoD contract going to a self-driving truck startup, partnered with a Chinese LiDAR firm, and that LiDAR tech was found on U.S. bases.
That's bad.
Even a case where a Chinese intelligence official apparently owned a U.S. defense contractor. And then there's the university angle.
How do universities fit in?
Well, some U.S. universities do research for both the DoD and have partnerships in China. Duke University, for example, has a campus in China with Wuhan University.
And Wuhan University has issues.
Links to the People's Liberation Army. Accusations of helping China access sensitive U.S. tech. There's even an example of DoD-funded camera research done with Wuhan, now apparently used for surveillance in China.
It's incredibly complex, this intersection of global research, funding, and national security.
It really is a constant balancing act between fostering innovation and protecting critical technology and information.
A very sobering perspective on innovation challenges. Okay, let's move to our final segment, the S2 Underground Update and other U.S. news.
All right, starting with the Wire report from yesterday, May 21st.
No?
Some disturbing incidents internationally.
Okay.
In France, tragically, a 14-year-old boy was murdered in Nunerwiss. An axe attack in a grocery store parking lot. Very few details released about the attacker.
Just awful. And something in the Netherlands, too.
Yes, in Amsterdam. A stabbing attack left 2 people dead and 2 police officers were wounded. It seems it might have been a domestic situation, not random violence. It happened in an area known for drug issues. Police did fire their weapons.
Okay. Turning back to the U.S., the Midwest is still recovering from that severe weather.
Yes, recovery efforts are ongoing. And in St. Louis, there's now an investigation into the emergency response to that tornado that hit downtown.
Why an investigation?
Because the city's tornado siren network malfunctioned completely. No warnings went out.
No warnings at all.
None. The head of the city's emergency management agency is on leave. It looks like the system, installed in 1999, might not have been properly tested in decades. Maybe the activation switch just failed.
That's unbelievable. A critical failure. Okay, what else? Washington, D.C.
There was a state visit. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa was at the White House.
And the focus was?
A major focus was the internal situation in South Africa, specifically concerns about potential genocide.
Did President Trump raise this?
He apparently pressed President Ramaphosa directly. Ramaphosa denied any genocide. But the White House then, reportedly, played video clips they believe showed evidence to the contrary. This wasn't announced beforehand.
Wow. So, sending a strong message.
It's being interpreted as the White House putting South Africa on notice regarding what they see as potential ethnic cleansing and rising cultural violence. A very direct diplomatic move.
Very direct indeed. Okay, let's get the latest from the military summary report today, May 22nd, on Ukraine.
The big news is a massive ongoing Ukrainian drone strike against Russia that started yesterday morning.
Massive how?
Well, the Russian MOD reported downing drones throughout yesterday and into this morning. The numbers kept climbing: 34, then 64, then over 100, then another 77, then 105 more by this morning. Hundreds in total claimed intercepted.
Hundreds. Are they getting through?
Reports suggest the drones are getting closer to Moscow than before, so there's a real likelihood of Ukrainians breaking through air defenses.
Which could mean strikes on Moscow and Russian retaliation.
Both are distinct possibilities, maybe even involving Russia's Orashnik missile system in response.
Okay, what about the ground fighting? The southern front?
Russians are claiming control over Zaluna, which is on that key 0510 road. They also seem to be outflanking Noel from the north.
Potentially forcing a Ukrainian retreat.
That seems possible. The expectation is a continued Russian push west towards Velika Novosilka and then Huliaipol, trying to break through and encircle Huliaipol. They're also reportedly improving positions near Vuhledar.
What about other hotspots? Klitschivka.
Russians have reportedly started assaulting Andriivka there. There's video, apparently, of them dropping surrender leaflets.
And are they making progress?
Pro-Russian sources claim control of southern and eastern Andriivka, saying Ukrainians abandoned bombed positions.
Bakhmut direction. Bodanivka.
Conflicting reports there. Ukrainians claim they counterattacked in the northern part and raised their flag. Russians claim they still hold it. So, unclear.
Seversk.
No major changes on the ground, but lots of Russian artillery hitting Ukrainian positions along the Siversky Donets River could be setting up a southern flanking move.
And Kupiansk and Lyman.
No significant updates reported there.
A lot happening. Very fluid. Okay, finally, let's look at the Eurodollar University report. Something about banks and shadow banks.
Yes, a really significant increase globally, but especially Europe and the U.S., in lending from regulated banks to shadow banks.
How significant?
American banks alone loaned $333.6 billion in new funds to offshore shadow banks just in the first quarter this year.
Wow. Why is that concerning?
Well, the timing is key. It's happening as liquidity is worsening, credit quality is being challenged, and the economy looks shaky. Plus, China sold a near-record amount of treasuries in Q1.
So this bank-to-non-bank connection feels risky.
It hints at potential problems, either de-risking gone wrong or maybe forced re-risking. It increases the chance of contagion, maybe more disruptions like those liquidations we saw back in April.
How is this lending happening? What does the data show?
There's an increase in resales, which is basically secured lending to offshore counterparties, including shadow banks in places like the Caribbean.
Okay.
And also a big jump in American bank claims on other foreign entities, specifically offshore non-bank financial firms. These trends look similar to spikes we saw before other periods of trouble.
Like late 2018, the 2023 banking issues, August 2024.
Exactly. Lending to these offshore funds tends to spike during questionable periods, then pulls back. It suggests banks might be acting as a lender of last resort for this shadow system.
So what are the possible interpretations? Why are banks doing this now?
Two main theories. One, banks got scared after SVB, so they're de-risking from the real economy and lending secured funds to these non-banks for yield instead. It's seen as safer, arm's length.
And the other interpretation?
More worrying, that banks have backstop credit lines out to these funds and the funds are drawing on them because they're in trouble. Sort of like the SIVs and SPVs back in 2007, 2008.
Right, becoming entangled. What's the biggest underlying fear?
That these shadow banks haven't really been tested by a proper, harsh credit cycle. Jamie Dimon warned about this, saying credit today is a bad risk.
Implying risks are underestimated.
Potentially, yeah. Especially by direct lenders in the shadow system. Overstating loan values, portfolio yields, fund returns, and regulated banks get exposed through the collateralized loans.
So even if it's not predicting bank failures.
It suggests the whole system is becoming more fragile. This connection can amplify problems, turn liquidity issues into bigger crises like we saw glimpses of in April.
A lot to keep an eye on there. The hidden plumbing of the financial system can cause real problems. Thank you for that deep dive into all these complex areas.
Absolutely. And thank you, our listeners, for joining us today.
If you found this useful, please do like and subscribe. It helps others find the deep dive. And if you're able, consider supporting us through our GoFundMe page. The link's in the description.
We'll be back tomorrow digging into more crucial developments.
Until then, stay informed.